3. The Runaways. A girl? Rigel was totally confused by the voice. What was a girl doing in woods like these? Besides that, she sounded young, quite young, probably younger than he was, so what was she doing out here? "Who are you?" he finally asked slowly, peering through the shadows. In the half-light, and with the uncertain flicker of firelight, he could only see a dark outline of the strange girl, crouched in the bracken. There was the low, uneasy growl from a dog behind the girl, and Rigel stepped back quickly. "Settle down, Tag," came the girl's voice again. Rigel could see her patting a large and very shaggy dog. "We're not going to hurt you, human. We're just cold." "Well, come closer then," Rigel said finally. His brain hinged on one thing the girl had said. She had called him human, and that was odd. The girl stood and moved into the firelight. There was a rustling behind her as the dog followed. It was a wolfhound, still quite young, Rigel noticed, and now that it had been reassured there was no danger, its tail was wagging in a slow, cheerful rhythm. His attention was drawn back to the girl, who was slowly coming into focus as she moved to the fire. Bright green eyes, not gray-green, like a human's green, but deep green, like the forest. Rigel had never seen someone with eyes like that. Her face was young. She was probably only around 10 or 11, younger than he was. Her hair, long and dark, fell in ringlets down past her shoulders. It was probably very pretty hair if it wasn't filled with tangles and bits of thorns, which it was now. As she warmed herself by the fire, the light illuminated her form, and Rigel stared in both wonder and confusion. While he had taken the girl to be wearing a coat made of furs, he now realized, to his bewilderment, that the fur was her own, a thick pelt of soft black fur that covered her torso and mid-leg. He also could see, now that the light was better, her upturned nose, pointed ears, a face that was not quite human. She wasn't human. "You're a wild kid," he said at last, searching for the word. The name was one from stories, from myths and legends that the old women would tell back home, one that was attached to the young children who liked playing in the mud. "Little wild kid," their parents would chuckle. "I didn't know you were real," he added finally, as the girl had hardly reacted to his statement. Now she looked up at him, a quizzical expression on her face. "I didn't know humans were real either. I'd never seen one before this week." She looked him up and down critically. "You're a little smaller than the others." "I'm only 12, Rigel protested. "I'll grow." She seemed to consider this, then smiled and nodded. "Well, it can't be helped anyway. I like the size you are. If you were taller, you would be scarier. Like the traders." Rigel looked up, suddenly hopeful. "Traders? You mean there's a port nearby?" If the traders were still here, maybe he could go with them. Maybe they could take him home. "No port, as far as I know," the wild kid girl said. "There were traders that came to Casabran a few weeks ago. We did business with them. I wanted a look inside their ships, and then they kidnapped me." Her face had fallen. "I don't know why." "Well, you're a wild kid. They could—" Rigel stopped himself. It wouldn't do much good to explain to her that a real, living wild kid would probably gain much profit as a circus sideshow or something along those lines. "You look very tired. You should sleep. Tag and I can keep watch," the girl said, standing and stretching. "And then we can decide what to do tomorrow." What?" Rigel said, confused. He was tired and sore. This made it harder to think things through. But if he didn't have to stay up looking out for danger, if he had this strange new companion— "I'll be back. Tag will stay with you." She disappeared into the woods again. Wait, Rigel started, then stopped and yawned. The adrenaline of earlier was wearing on him, and now he felt exhausted. Still confused, and a little fearful, he curled up close to the fire, the flicker of the flames and the warmth eventually lulling him to sleep. Rigel woke to the strange cries of the birds. Dazed and disoriented for an instant, he tried to remember what had happened and where he was. Then he remembered the storm, being dragged into the sea, and now he was here with— He looked around. The wild kid girl was nowhere to be seen. The wolfhound, Tag, was still asleep across the clearing. The fire was dying down, and now in the chill morning air, with his damp clothes, Rigel was freezing. He got up and found a few fallen branches to add to the fire, then settled down beside it again and thought for a long moment. He was alone, in an unknown land, with no cloak, no shoes, and no other provisions. He was hungry and quite thirsty. And now there was a young wild kid girl here, too, somehow. There was a soft rustling in the brush to his left, and he turned swiftly. It was only the girl, carrying something on a piece of bark. "Hello, I'm glad to see you're awake. I was looking for food." "Did you find any?" Rigel asked. She held out the bark, which carried 3 small fish. "Not much, sorry, but I guess it's something." "It's better than nothing," Rigel told her, feeling a small surge of hope, and looked at her again. "You can hunt? And fish?" He knew wild kids were some of the best natural hunters in the world, which meant that maybe this girl could be very helpful. She shrugged slightly. "Not very well. Not like the others in my clan. But I can do it a little." "That's great. That's perfect." Rigel stoked the fire, creating a small space in the coals to cook the fish in. "Okay, might work better to cut them up and roast them on spits. Can you go cut a few green branches? Then they won't burn." The girl got up and disappeared for a little while. By the time she returned, carrying the sticks, Rigel had cleaned and gutted the fish by the sea. It was messy work, considering the only tool he had was a sharp stone. But it was better than nothing, as they'd pointed out before. They speared the pieces of fish on the sticks and set them over the fire, then both sat in silence. "So, you were taken by traders?" Rigel asked finally, for the sake of conversation. "Yes. They were there to do business with my father, the chieftain of the Mara Ntel." "Is that your tribe?" "Clan. There's 5 of them," she explained matter-of-factly. "Mara Ntel, Mara Cyan, Mara Ifriti, Mara Rinla, and Mara de Brenna." The foreign words were unfamiliar to Rigel, but he found the story fascinating. "Well, what do I call you, anyway?" The wild kid girl stood, straightened, and bowed slightly in the fashion of her people, touching her fingers to her lips, brow, and then chest. "I am Dusty, daughter of Taislip, daughter of Conera, firstborn of Chief Sorrel." Rigel looked at her, impressed. "Your father is the chief?" Dusty nodded proudly, then looked at him quizzically. "And what's your name?" "I'm Rigel, son of Marin, of Gayrile." Dusty thought a moment. "I don't know where Gayrile is. I've heard of it, I think, but I've never been to the mainland before." "Me neither, honestly," Rigel admitted with a faint grin. "Well, Gayrile is north of here. It's one of the northern isles. By my guesses, we're in Daffodilian." There was a brief pause. Dusty settled down by the fire, her brow furrowed. "What are you going to do?" Rigel thought a moment, realizing he still had to come up with a plan. "I'm not sure. Kersia might be our best bet, but if Norin's right, I'm not sure that'd be safe." "Who is Norin?" Dusty asked. "And why not?" Rigel took a breath, not sure he should tell her. Then he shrugged mentally. She was here with him, so she might as well know the risks. "Well, Norin says, he's my guardian, by the way, he says that there's trouble in Kunsia. Gayrile's had a lot of problems in the last few years, most of them brought about by someone named Saphakon, and now this Saphakon has sent his deputy Cato to attack Kersia." "Why?" "Well, Kersia is the only thing keeping Saphakon from taking over Gayrile already," Rigel explained. "I mean, since Gayrile is ultimately under the High King, Saphakon's had to keep his conquest on the down low up till now, but now he's done with that. Now he's ready to attack." Dusty looked interested. "So it might not be safe to go to this Kersia place? Even though that's where the Lisny people are?" "Right. And they might be able to help us. At the very least, there's a port there, so I can go home." The fish had seared to a lovely black color, and the smell of cooking meat rose in the air. Dusty removed them from the spits, setting them back on the bark. She and Rigel ate the pieces in silence. Aside from the numerous small bones, the fish weren't bad, and Rigel was hungry enough to take whatever he could have. By the time they finished, his mouth felt dry from want of water. "We're going to have to find water soon," he said, standing. Dusty was feeding Tag the leftover fish. "Well, we're along the coast. If we follow the coastline west towards Kersia, then we'll eventually find a stream soon, and then we can follow it back to the spring." "Right," Rigel murmured. He doused the fire, covering it with sand, then turned to his 2 companions. There was a level of responsibility here, he realized, leading a young wild kid to Kersia. He felt it settle on him. He decided, then and there, that he would be sure nothing happened to either Dusty or Tag. He had to keep them safe. He looked towards the trees. "All right, well, let's go." They followed the coastline for a while, keeping just within the trees. Rigel had never seen woods like these. The forests along Gayrile's coasts were spindly and stunted by sea wind and weather. These trees were taller than 2 houses, towering up as far as he could see, their great boughs stretching over them. After 20 minutes or so, the beach became rocky and treacherous, and they were forced to turn and walk in the forest. They had still seen no sign of fresh water. Rigel's mouth was dry, and his stomach was beginning to cramp. Dusty moved on ahead, taking it all in. Her fur mottled with the shadows of the trees, so at times she was almost invisible. At one point, she vanished around a bend. Rigel jogged ahead, pricking his feet on the branches and needles on the ground, looking around for her. "Hey!" he called finally, panicking for an instant that he had been left alone. Dusty appeared in another second from the bushes to his right. "Come here. I found something." Rigel shook his head in both relief and frustration that she'd made him worry. "We don't have time for exploring, Dusty." "I found water," Dusty interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Rigel stopped, feeling guilty. "You did? Where?" He followed her through the brush, up a small hill, into a meadow. The grass grew tall and green, waving in the wind. He could see a rocky outcrop ahead and could hear the water trickling off it. They pushed through the grass and stood in a clearing. Several dogwood trees grew in a circle around a spring. Water bubbled up through the rocks, washing down in a stream. Tag was already lapping it up greedily, his tail wagging. Rigel and Dusty ran forward and took turns drinking the fresh water. The taste of clean water washed away the lingering, stinging salt in Rigel's throat, and he felt much refreshed after he finished. He leaned back against the rocks, surveying the scene. "That's odd," he said after a while. "It's nearly winter. Dogwood trees shouldn't be blooming." "Can't you feel it?" Dusty asked, her voice filled with awe. "Those kind of rules don't apply to this place. This must be the Forest of Light. My father has told me about it several times, but it's been a long time since any wild kids set foot here." Rigel looked around, a little unsure. "What is it?" It's a place of refuge, created at the dawn of time, after evil entered the world. A place that no evil could ever touch. No war, no death. The High Light created it after the Dividing War, I think." Rigel looked around. This place certainly fit the description of the wood that he had long since dismissed as mythology. The entire place seemed to breathe with life, like one living creature. Birds twittered cheerily in the trees, and butterflies flitted about the flowers. There was peace here, calm. They seemed suspended in the glory of the silent wood. Norrin had told him the story of the making, and Rigel thought he remembered something about the Forest of Light. He had dismissed most of it as mere mythology, but here they were. Perhaps the rest of it was true, too. They didn't have any way to store the water from the spring, so the best they could do was drink their fill and keep moving. They walked for several minutes in the wood, the light and life of the forest letting Rigel know that they were still in the same place. He sensed when they left a few moments later, entering the shadowed woods again. "I can hear people," Dusty said unexpectedly. Rigel turned sharply. The sleepiness and peace of the Forest of Light had somehow made him forget their predicament. He also remembered, with a jolt, what Norrin had told him of Cato. "You do? Where?" He strained his ears, but could hear nothing. Dusty looked around slowly, her green eyes scanning the wood. The fur along her back had stood up, like an uneasy cat. I don't know, but I can hear them moving through the woods. I think they're a distance away still." "Probably. Otherwise I'd be able to hear them too," Rigel decided slowly. "I don't think you would," Dusty said softly. Her matter-of-fact tone rankled him somehow. "Why's that?" Dusty looked at him and shrugged slightly, and her answer chilled him to the core. "Because they aren't breathing." Cato. Rigel swung around, looking swiftly around the shadowed wood, remembering what Norrin had told him of the deathless host. He could hear nothing but the distant cry of birdsong, the rustle of the wind through the ferns. All normal sounds, but the silence was sinister. "Run," he whispered finally. "Down the hill into the ravine. We can hide there." They jogged through the brush. Dusty moved slower, still turning and looking around. Rigel could see her face registering the many sounds and scents that he couldn't pick up. "Faster," Rigel urged her. Dusty had paused uncertainly, listening intently. "Hang on. I can hear something else. Someone below us." "I don't hear anything. Let's go." Rigel grabbed her arm, and together they ran down the slope into the ravine. Tag trotted behind them, his ears flicked back, his tail curled up in alert. They reached the base of the ridge and stood for several moments, panting, listening for several tense seconds. Dusty was silent, her eyes still flicking around them uneasily. "Hear anything now?" Rigel asked. The words were barely out of his mouth when the telltale clatter of horse hooves came from down the ravine path. 4. A Tale of Two Wanderers. Rigel stood frozen in fear for a moment, unable to move. His mind went rapidly to thoughts of Cato, and remembered all that Norrin had told him. They were trapped. There was no way they could outrun such a force. In a second, he made his decision. "Run," he panted hoarsely to Dusty. "Along the ravine. Go as fast as you can." Dusty looked at him, her young face worried. "What are you going to do?" "I'll hold them off," Rigel said, trying to sound brave, but his voice trembled. Dusty considered this for a moment, then shrugged slowly. "Wouldn't it be better if we both did that?" Rigel opened his mouth to argue, then realized that as much as he would like to think otherwise, he was terrified at the thought of being left here alone. He wasn't sure how much help Dusty could offer, but still, it was better than nothing. "Do you think they'll capture us?" She glanced at him, a slight frown on her face. "They aren't the ones I heard in the wood. These ones are breathing." That meant it wasn't Cato's undead force coming for them now. That thought somehow made Rigel relax. "How many?" he asked as they edged along the boulders, seeking for a hiding place. Dusty peeked over the rocks, peering down the path. The thin road curved slightly around the sheer cliff they huddled beside, which made it impossible to see who was coming. "I don't know, but not a whole army." Her voice was more puzzled than scared. "Get down," Rigel cautioned her, pulling her into the shadow of the rocks. Tag sat beside him, ears flicked forward, his hackles raised in uncertainty. "Good boy," Rigel murmured to the young wolfhound, who wagged his tail slowly but made no other move. The horses were drawing nearer. Rigel could hear the animals panting, snorting as they jogged along. He pressed himself back against the rock that Dusty hid behind, but couldn't quite get the rest of himself behind the boulder, and so he had a clear view of the road. Two horses, a bay and a black, clip-clopped into view, moving at a brisk trot. Their riders seemed engaged in conversation, one huge and muscular, with a green cloak, the other tall and lean, wearing a mottled gray cloak. Rigel didn't move, hardly dared to breathe as they approached. They were just passing him when the rider on the black horse turned his head, his keen green eyes locking on Rigel. Rigel saw confusion, then suspicion, cross his face. He reined in sharply. His companion, who was still talking, turned in confusion, then frowned as he saw Rigel. Rigel remained frozen against the wall, heart pounding, totally unsure of what to say. "Who are you?" the rider on the black horse asked. His voice was clear and crisp, with an elegant northern accent punctuating the vowels in the words. Rigel stepped away from the rocks, pushing Tag behind him, stammering for a reply. I'm no one, sir. I think I'm lost." He saw the stranger's face soften. "Forgive me. I don't believe you to be a foe. At least not yet." There was a tiny hint of humor in the stranger's green eyes. He was tall and wiry, with whipcord strength. He had no hair on his head or face, and his skin was silver. Those features marked him as a Lisney. Over his right eye was a scar that trailed down to his jaw. Rigel was certain he had seen this stranger before. In a book, perhaps? He wasn't sure. The other rider was unfamiliar, with a scruffy dark beard. There was probably at least one drop of giant's blood in his veins, Rigel decided, judging by his size alone. The man was easily twice his height. "I say, Your Honor, looks like we've found someone," the giant announced loudly. "I would say we have," said the Lisney, studying Rigel carefully. Finally he straightened. "Who are you, boy? And what are you doing in these lands?" "I'm Rigel, son of Marin, of Gayrile," Rigel said slowly, trying to sound older. "Gayrile," the giant echoed, glancing at the other rider. The Lisney's face was unchanged, but Rigel could see suspicion in his eyes, and suddenly felt a prickle of fear. "What part of Gayrile?" he asked slowly, dismounting and moving forward. A small stone struck the rock behind him, a few feet from his head. "Stop!" Dusty's voice rang over the scene. She crouched on top of a boulder 10 paces from them, holding a second rock, larger than the first, at the ready. "He's with me. Don't hurt him or I'll crush your head." Rigel looked at her in horror, then back at the stranger, sure the Lisney would kill them both. A slight smile was playing at the Lisney's face. "I believe you," he said mildly. Dusty lowered the stone slightly, still looking unsure. Below her, at the base of the rock, Tag was growling warily. The Lisney looked back at Rigel. "I mean no threat to either of you, and I am only asking questions. Strange rumors have come from Gayrile as of late, and so we are trying to sort them all out." "What sort of rumors?" Rigel asked, as Dusty slid down from the rock and trotted over. "Nothing good," the Lisney replied grimly. He shook his head. They will be solved eventually, I am sure. In the meantime, what are you two doing out in these wilds? We aren't sure where we are, Rigel said slowly. Dusty was taken by traders, and I was swept here in a storm. Now we're farther from the coast than we wanted to be, and we still don't know where we are. We're trying to get to Kersia, Dusty piped up. Are you indeed? Well then, it might be best for you to stay with us. We ride for Kersia with important news. Rigel nodded, feeling quite relieved, then looked up curiously. Then who are you? My companion is Glentree, my deputy and friend, the Lisney said, nodding to the giant. He extended a hand. I am Dendayo Key. He said it calmly, but Rigel stepped back, stunned for an instant. What? You are Dendayo? He gasped finally. Dendayo Key, commander of the Red Dawn, brother of the High King, and Rigel had behaved so rudely to him. Yes, I am, Dendayo said with the same half-smile. He was still holding out a hand, waiting. Rigel couldn't bring himself to take it. He was totally at a loss as to how to address such a hero. Finally, he dropped to one knee, motioning for Dusty to do the same. Sir, I didn't know. None of that, Dendayo said hastily, helping him up again. Honestly, I was never one for all that protocol. Jean was, but never me. He smiled slightly. That's why he's the king and I'm the commander. Hearing such a thing made Rigel smile weakly, and he finally shook Dendayo's hand in greeting. Then, is the Red Dawn near here too? What are you doing here? Dendayo shook his head. Our army remains at Kersia. Glentree and I are traveling back from the eastern cities. We spoke with their barons. And will no doubt find your company more agreeable than theirs, Glentree added with a crooked grin. What did you mean about the rumor from Gayrile? Is it about the warlord? About Cato? Rigel asked slowly. The two riders exchanged a glance. It seems you know of what we face, Dendayo commented at last. Just a little, Rigel said. We heard people while we were up there, Dusty said, pointing up the hill towards the forest. Well, I did, but it sounded odd, not at all normal. A shadow crossed Dendayo's face as Dusty spoke, and his expression was suddenly serious. Come with us. We had best discuss these things after we make camp. He lifted Dusty up behind Glentree and swung into the saddle. Come along, Rigel of Gayrile. We have much to discuss. Still in a daze, Rigel mounted up behind Dendayo, and they clattered on down the path. They rode for an hour or so, gradually moving west, Tag trotting along behind the horses. As the sun began to dip down behind the trees, Dendayo called a halt, and they set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by thickets. Glentree and Dendayo traveled light, Rigel realized. Glentree unloaded the gear, setting it in a neat pile, then set to building a fire. Dendayo offered Rigel a pair of boots, which, while a little too big, protected his bruised feet. Rigel and Dusty stood in the background, not quite sure how to help. Dendayo seemed to notice and had Dusty help Glentree gather more wood, while he and Rigel prepared the evening meal. Nothing much, the Lisney commented as he rummaged through the bags. We've got a fire, that's good. Hot dinner is more appealing in the cold evenings. Rigel nodded, his stomach tight with hunger. Aside from the 2 little fish that morning, he hadn't eaten all day. I never pictured, a commanding general, having to cook meals, he admitted finally. Glentree normally offers, Dendayo said. He says it's out of duty, but he only offered after the first time we were on the trail. He chuckled softly to himself, then looked back at the other bags. Pull out that pot in there, and a few water flasks. We killed a rabbit this morning before running into you two, and the meat will taste excellent in a soup. Rigel did as instructed. He was still a little in awe of who was talking to him, but he was beginning to relax. There was a calm, easy-going air about the Lisney that made him feel calmer, too. Sir, Dendayo, earlier today, Dusty and I got water in a forest, a different kind of forest than the rest of this place. Dendayo nodded. The Forest of Light, a haven for peace and life, created by the Highlight himself after the Dividing War, or so the legends say. The Dividing War? Long ago, there was a battle between the species. Many lives were lost, and this part of the world has never been the same, so they say. Why did they fight? Rigel asked, fascinated by the story. Dendayo smiled wryly as he set the pot over the fire. Well, the legend says that the Netrocreans and the Phyrocreans always despised one another, and so they battled, but I'm not sure how much of that is true, or why they hated each other. The who? That's a story for another time, Dendayo told him, shaking his head, but he was smiling. He will drain me entirely with all your questions. Glentree stoked the fire, and they settled down to wait while the soup cooked.
Well then, young'uns, Glentree rumbled as he sat down heavily. Let's have your story, then. I'm most interested to hear it.
Ragel glanced at Dusty, then shrugged slightly. Well, her side of the story comes first. Dusty nodded and began. I got here the day before we met Ragel. My clan had gone to the coast to meet with traders from Generative Island. They exchanged goods with us and made ready to leave. One of them asked if I wanted to go on board, since their ships were so different than ours. I did. My papa didn't see me go. No one did. She looked down at her hands, her face sad and worried. They locked me up right away. Tag followed me. I didn't know he did. They got him, too. Tag settled down next to her, his ears flicked back, as if understanding the story. Dendio and Glentree looked grim. Glentree shook his head, his face scornful.
Those Drinral traders are just as much pirates. No wonder they'd want to take you. We're glad you got away, he added, smiling at her.
How did you get away? Ragel asked. He hadn't heard this much of the story yet. Dusty smiled slightly. We sailed north for 3 weeks, I think, though I lost track of time below decks. We went north up the Durban Strait and then west towards Kunsia. I think they planned to sell their wares in Keeley.
It's probably the right guess, Dendio told her.
Yes, well, they docked offshore. I got Tag loose and we got away. We were in the woods that first night, and the next night we found Ragel's fire. Silence fell for several moments. Darkness and chill had settled over the forest, yet here by the fire it was comforting and warm.
And what about you, lad? Glentree asked finally, looking at Ragel.
Ragel could feel the eyes of the others on him, and shrugged slightly. It's not as interesting as hers. I was fishing off the coast of Gayrile with my guardian Norin. We got caught in a storm.
Norin? Dendio repeated, raising his head. So he's still all right, after all these years?
Ragel stared at him in surprise. You know him?
Norin, shabby fisherman Norin, a friend of Dendio Key. Not as well as you, I'm sure, Dendio admitted with a slight smile. But a few of our people helped found the Guardians of Gayrile with him. He looked up. He's your mentor?
Yeah, we were fishing. I caught something in my net, but the storm picked up. I got washed overboard and tangled up, and then swept east by the current. Ragel turned back to Dendio, still caught up on the Norin bit. I didn't know he helped found the Guardians. I thought he just fought with them.
I doubt he'd want you to know too much, so it'd do little good discussing it with him now, Dendio said. It was his idea, his and a few Lisney's, like I said. They did it together. The news was stunning, and Ragel could barely believe it. Norin, one of the founders of the Guardians of Gayrile. What happened to them? Dusty asked softly, looking up at Dendio. I have only heard a little of the Guardians, and they sounded unstoppable. Dendio took a heavy breath. About a decade ago, after the fall of the tyrannical Queen Kirkadash, a man named Saphakon rose in power in Gayrile. He had great power in alchemy, and in the ancient wizard arts, much like Norin did. Norin? Ragel echoed, even more startled. He was a wizard. A powerful one, too. I am afraid after the Guardians were defeated, he kept his powers hidden away for fear of causing any more of his comrades to die. Ragel looked away, shocked by this revelation. Norin had not been a simple warrior in the Guardians. He had been their leader. And Saphakon had forced him into hiding, and killed many of his fellow warriors, along with Marin. He stared at the ground. I didn't know any of that, he said at last, somehow feeling cheated. He probably doesn't like to talk about it now. I wouldn't either, if I was in his place. Dendio took a breath. But with the situation in Gayrile now, I'm glad to hear he's doing well. You mean with Saphakon? Ragel guessed. Dendio nodded gravely. Saphakon has, as of late, broken all ties with Kersia. He has rebelled, unofficially, as it were. I fear it may be a long time before Gayrile is safe again. Norin says Cato is working with Saphakon, Ragel said. He said that Cato is his deputy, and that he has... He trailed off, not sure how to put it. The idea of an army of undead was the stuff of legends, and it felt almost silly to talk about it here. But Dendio was looking at him and nodding slowly. Norin is right, in that sense. Saphakon has always been interested in alchemy and working magic. With the objects of power that he created, he can do virtually anything. Cato is another matter. Cato's focus is not in a sizable force, as Saphakon's is, but in the quality of his warriors. That is why Cato has taken quite a while studying and learning until he could create the hazes. Hazes? Dusty asked softly. What are hazes? Dendio and Glentree exchanged a quick glance. It's not a nighttime tale, you two, Glentree said at last. We'll tell you a bit of it, at least, just so's you know. Cato had several men in his army volunteer for an experiment, and he concocted some sort of cauldron in which he created them. That made the hazes."
"What do they do?" Rigel asked. Dendio took a breath. "Well, to put it lightly, that spell makes them immortal, deathless to everything, or so we've gathered. They have caused considerable damage already. Not only that, those hazes, they're very strong, much stronger than a normal man. And they're changed in another way. They don't remember anything about their past lives. They're just there. I couldn't call it life."
"The spell enhances anything about the victims that was already there," Glentry explained. "So if you got a real skilled warrior, he'll be an extra skilled haze. The hazes, they're shells, husks of the former people they were. All Cato's done is taken the worst parts inside a man and amplified it."
"Then they can't be stopped," Rigel said with a horrible sinking feeling. "There is a way," Dendio said, his eyes two green lights of flame, "and we will figure it out. There's always a catch with spells like these, and Cato was especially hasty in creating them. That means there has to be some weakness the hazes have that we haven't yet learned." "What could it be?" Dusty asked slowly. She sat huddled by the fire, stroking Tag's shaggy fur.
"That's what we don't yet know," Dendio admitted. "But don't think we'll give up," Glentry boomed. "The Star People never abandoned hope, back in the ancient battles."
"The stars," Dendio said. "No, they never did. But we must win this battle without them, I fear." "The stars," Dusty echoed, her eyes shining as she stared up into the sky. "The ancient warriors of the night sky." Her eyes traced the shimmering constellation of the northern sword. "What I love about them most, I think, is that you could be anywhere on Orlell, and you could still look up and see that same sword." Rigel studied the sky. Strange, he thought vaguely, how the longer you look at stars, the more seem to appear. "Norn would tell me the stories of the 7 servants of the Highlight," he said softly. "They are the most powerful of the Star People, and they do the bidding of the Highlight, sometimes even bringing his messages down to Orlell." He paused. "Is the Highlight real, Dendio? I mean, no one but the stars have even seen him." Dendio was silent for a moment. "Is the wind real? You can feel it, see its works, watch it tear down. But no one has ever seen it." He smiled slightly. "That's the way of the Highlight. We've never seen him, but we've seen his works." He looked back at the sky. "Even if the Forest of Light is the only remnant of his glory left here, we must still seek his promises." There was a long silence. The wind stirred the trees, blowing across Rigel's face. Dendio finally stood. "Well, you'd best have some dinner before sleep. Glentry, I'll take the first watch. Perhaps we can loan our new friends those extra sleeping mats for the night." "Aye, sir," Glentry said, moving to the horses and returning with 2 sleeping mats as well as 2 blankets. "It'll be a little chilly," he told them as they spread the mats out. "Best set 'em by the fire, and you'll stay nice and warm." Rigel settled down by the fire with a warm bowl of rabbit stew. Despite the chill weather, having a mat under him and a blanket over him was such a welcome change from last night that he didn't mind. He curled up, staring into the flames, deep in thought until he slipped off to sleep. Partway through the night, he dreamed of hazes wreaking havoc on Kersia and marching towards Gayrile. Fearfully, he tried to stop them, but he couldn't. He fought desperately, but each move seemed to be in vain. Panic filled him, and he hung between despair and sorrow. Then, maybe in his dreams, perhaps in reality, a wind brushed across his face, cool and calming. "Be still." He heard the voice, and wondered if it had been within his dream or not. Before he could think about it, he had fallen back asleep. 5. The Voice of Cato. Birdsong woke Rigel, drawing him out of sleep. He was still curled up beside the fire. Tag slept beside him. Rigel patted the shaggy wolfhound, who wagged his tail softly. "Good morning," came Dusty's voice. She sat across from him on the other side of the fire. "Morning," Rigel said groggily, rubbing his eyes. He sat up and looked around. Glentry was tending the horses, but there was no sign of their leader. "Where's Dendio?"
"Morning, lad. He's gone back toward the Forest of Light to get water, but I bet he'll be back in a bit. He wanted to investigate what Dusty heard yesterday," the giant told him. He removed one of the saddlebags and started towards the fire. "Breakfast is almost ready." Rigel rolled up his mat and settled down by the fire, trying to warm his feet. By now his bare feet were scratched and bruised, covered with dirt. He figured the rest of him looked like that too.
The bruises and cuts from the incident with the soldiers were only a fraction of the many small injuries scoring his body. The pot of water over the fire rose to a boil, and Glentree offered both the children tea. He got to work with a skillet of eggs and potatoes, and in another moment breakfast was ready. Rigel ate hungrily, grateful for the second warm meal in the last 24 hours. He accepted a second mug of tea and looked up at Glentree. "Where will we go today?"
"We'll keep moving west. We've got a lot of ground to cover afore we cross the border, and even then we'll have to go quick. The mountain passes will be blocked with snow sooner than you'd think."
"What would we do if they were blocked?" Dusty asked.
"We'd go the long way, around the mountains to Badwater, and then east by sea. Ideally, we won't have to do that. Speed is our friend at the moment. We need to get to Carcia before Cato does. The High King is counting on us."
Glentree finished his breakfast, rinsed off the plates, and put the cooking items back in the saddlebags.
"Better get packed up. Time to get going."
Rigel helped him repack the saddlebags and fasten them back on behind the horse's saddle. Glentree instructed him to grab the kettle, which they had left by the fire, along with Dendio's share of breakfast for when he returned. Rigel moved to obey, and at the same moment a shrill, wailing noise rose up from the woods. Glentree's head snapped up at the sound.
"That's Dendio's hunting horn," he said, almost to himself. "Something's amiss."
The horn sounded once again, then all was quiet. Even the birds had fallen silent. The forest was suddenly still.
"Get here,"
Glentree ordered, and both children crossed quickly to him. Rigel's heart pounded with fear. Something was wrong. He sensed it. The birds hadn't gone quiet at Dendio's horn. He was sure of that. Something else, something worse, was wrong. Glentree lifted Dusty up onto the horse and reached for Rigel, who stepped back. "I can fight. I can help you," he insisted. He hated the thought of being sent away on horseback and leaving Glentree and Dendio to face off against unknown foes.
"No time for that, young'un. Right now you got to follow orders," Glentree told him, but he turned swiftly at the sound of horse hooves.
Dendio's sleek black mare cantered into the glade. Dendio hardly waited for the horse to stop as he slid from her back and faced his comrades. "Get the gear. Mount up. Hurry!"
"What's—"
Glentree started. Dendio had lifted the remaining saddlebags onto his horse and paused only long enough to reply. "Hazes." Rigel's throat felt dry. "Here?" he asked shakily.
"Coming,"
Dendio corrected, as Glentree finished gathering the supplies. "That's why we're leaving. Now, while we can." "But can't you fight them?" Rigel asked, a little of his fear leaving him. Dendio and Glentree were both skilled warriors. Surely they could fight. Dendio smiled slightly. "I appreciate the compliment, but I definitely couldn't beat them. Not alone. And we can't afford to have them catch us." Tag snarled unexpectedly, his eyes riveted on the far edge of the glade. Rigel didn't hear anything, but he trusted the wolf's senses. He tried one more time. But Dendio, couldn't I fight too? I'm sure I could try to—"
"Not here," Dendio said shortly. He looked at him hard. "This is not the place. Right now we've got to go. We've got to go now, before they—" But he was cut off as the brush at the far end of the glade was flung aside, and 3 figures stepped towards them. "Go!" Dendio barked. Glentree mounted up in front of Dusty, snapped the reins, and galloped away. Tag stood uneasily, growling, but the sight of the attackers and a whistle from Dusty sent him bounding in retreat. Rigel started towards Dendio's horse, but stopped, unable to tear his eyes away from the things in the clearing right now. He hadn't expected the hazes to look anything like this. In his mind, he'd imagined tall, muscular figures clad in black, or maybe ghost-like wraiths with swords. The creatures were certainly tall and very muscular, but their builds were bizarre. They all looked like they'd been human, once upon a time, but what they'd become was utterly alien. Their bodies were human enough, but the picture was incomplete, as though they'd been broken and then pieced together incorrectly. Rigel was reminded of an image someone had drawn in the sand, with the fuzzy, blurred lines forming the body. Their skin was gray, not the handsome silver tone that Dendio's was, but dulled, deadened gray, like a corpse's skin. And the faces were the worst, half human, half the shivering, blurry grayness that was their outlines. But he saw the hideous smiles stretch over their faces when they saw Dendio was alone. Not entirely alone, though. Rigel felt a sudden determination rise inside him. He stumbled back towards the horse, where Dendio's second sword hung from the saddlebag. He drew it free, a little surprised at the weight, but felt its balance in his grip at the same time. The 3 hazes were stepping closer. Dendio stood unmoving, his sword held ready, his green eyes rapidly analyzing the situation. Then he lunged, so fast Rigel hardly realized he'd moved.
His sword slashed across the chest of the nearest haze as he pivoted and cut at the second monster. The haze that had been wounded hardly reacted. It simply looked down at the huge wound in its chest, then watched as the flesh seemed to knit itself back together. Then it stepped forward with deadly speed. It kicked Dendayo in the chest as the Lizni lunged forward, sending him crashing back into the bracken. "Hey!" Rigel shouted, stepping forward, raising the short sword. His voice was small and weak in the sudden silence. All three hazes turned their heads slowly, their shifting eyes fixing on him. A new kind of fear suddenly filled him, and he realized, in an instant, that this had been a bad decision. Dendayo took advantage of the brief distraction, leaping to his feet and lunging forward. He raised his hands, red light glowing in his palms, and a blast of crackling red lightning shot from his hands. The blast hit the closest haze and sent it reeling sideways, knocking it to its knees. The other two hazes both raised their weapons, the larger charging towards Dendayo. Dendayo parried its sword and ducked under another blow, then fired another blast of crackling red. But the smaller haze stepped forward, flung its blade aside, and raised its own hands. Fire shot from its palms. The two blasts met in midair with a blinding, crackling flash. Rigel stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the light. When his vision cleared, he saw the third haze towering over him. He shouted again and swung the sword. The blade felt unfamiliar and much heavier than he had expected in his hands. The two blades met. The haze raised its sword over him again, swinging a brutal second blow. Rigel managed to drop back, but couldn't get his blade up and out of the way in time, and the blades met with a ringing crash that wrenched the sword from his hands. Rigel fell back, heart pounding. The haze towered over him, its lifeless eyes filled with hate. Rigel jumped to his feet and ran back, stooping to pick up his sword. But the haze moved just as fast, slashing at his neck. As he stooped, the blade missed and slashed instead across his shoulder and upper arm. Rigel only felt the impact at first, as if he'd been hit with a tree limb, and then the pain began, penetrating, searing hot pain in his arm. The blade had cut deep down his arm, and he could feel warm blood pooling in his palm. Dazed at the pain and the sight of his own blood, he fell back, swaying, feeling himself falling. The haze had stepped back. It wasn't trying to finish him off, nor was it leaving him. It seemed to be waiting for something. His vision seemed to be blurring, and he took another step back, blinking rapidly. Through the growing numbness in his chest, something else filled him, a sense of power, hate, greed, and the overwhelming desire, not desire, it was a need, to kill any living thing in sight. Kill, kill, kill. A dull, whispering voice was speaking inside his head, a voice he didn't recognize. Then a blast of red lightning sent the haze stumbling back. Dendayo caught Rigel as he swayed and hauled him up on the black horse, then sprang up behind. With a snap of the reins, they left the hazes behind. Rigel coughed. The repetitive jarring of the horse sent pain back into his arm. What just happened? His brain couldn't comprehend what had happened back there, where those dark thoughts had come from. The numbness was setting in again, much stronger than before. If they could only have killed those monsters right then perhaps... Dizziness engulfed him for a moment, and he nearly fell from the saddle, suddenly feeling sick. He felt Dendayo grip him tightly, holding him in place. "I told you to run," the Lizni reprimanded him softly. "Even both of us could not have stopped the hazes." He paused. "How do you feel? Is it just your arm?" Rigel didn't want to look like a wimp in front of Dendayo Key, but the numbness and that chilling voice back in the glade scared him somehow. "I can't feel my arm, and I'm cold." He was very cold. Now that he thought about it, he was much too cold considering that he had just been fighting and running. Dendayo's grip tightened slightly. All right. Don't think about it now. Right now I want you to focus. Picture everything you knew in Gayrile, all the people, what you did, anything. Talk to me about that." That was an odd order, Rigel thought, but he did, and in a moment he was rambling on about life in Gayrile. He talked about the soldiers in the market, about getting bread from Mr. Kellis, about going fishing with Norin, about swimming in the bay when the weather was warm enough. The numbness faded slightly as he talked, and the searing pain returned. He tried not to think about it. The horse slowed to a trot, then stopped, and Dendayo lifted him from the saddle. They were on the ground now, walking swiftly. He could hear snatches of sound, glimpses of his comrades and what they were doing, woven in through the gray fog that was slowly filling his head. The dull voice was speaking again, whispering in his head. "Give in. Let it take you. Become one of us." "Rigel? Is he hurt? What happened? What did they do?" That was Dusty, her voice filled with fear. "Give in." "He stayed and fought then?
Is he all right?" Glentry's voice, with the same note of worry. Rigel felt himself being lowered to the ground, to a mat by the fire. "Let it take you. You will be powerful, great, mighty." Dendayo's voice cut in, talking quickly, to Glentry occasionally, but mostly to Rigel. Rigel wished he would go away. He felt so tired, and now Dendayo was doing something to his arm. White-hot pain seared up into his shoulder, deafening the voice for a moment, and he cried out. "Easy," Dendayo told him softly. "Keep talking." Rigel realized that he'd been talking the whole time, murmuring senseless things about Gayrile, about how they had to wash the windows in the summer because in the winter the soap was bad for the glass, about how Norin didn't like his toast cut down the middle, about how Rigel's bedroom walls were painted gray and he had always wanted to paint them blue. The voice was fading away, sounding more desperate. "Fool, what are you doing? Don't you want to be powerful? He's ruining you. Can't you feel it? Give in. Let the spell take you." "Hold on, Rigel," Dendayo said quietly, and Rigel took a breath before he kept talking. "My father is named Marin, and he died because of Saphicon. That's why I couldn't join the soldiers in the market. Does that make sense?" "It does," Dendayo said gently. "Sleep. Try to sleep." Rigel saw the listener's blurry outline move as Dendayo stood, talking briefly to Glentry. "He was struck by one of their swords. I don't know how better to treat that kind of wound. It's in him now. Only time will tell." "He's a strong one. He might make it." Glentry's voice. That was the last thing Rigel heard. Until he suddenly awoke. Rigel blinked, his eyes reluctantly adjusting to the midday light. Where am I? He wasn't on Gayrile. Where was Norin? Then, slowly, everything came back to him. Being washed here in the storm, meeting Dusty and Tag, joining Dendayo Key and Glentry, the three hazes, and their shapeless, lifeless faces. He tried to sit up, then regretted it as pain shot through his shoulder, and he settled back again. Dusty, who was sitting across the fire, looked up. Her face was so tired and filled with worry that it made her look much older, but her eyes lit up as she saw him. "You're awake! I was pretty sure you'd make it, but I wasn't sure. You were all still and gray. It was awful." She stopped, looking at him for a long moment. "You're all right? I mean, you know where we are?" "I think so," Rigel said slowly. "How long have I been asleep?" "A little over a day," Dusty said, and grinned as Rigel looked at her in shock. "You needed it, especially after that wound." "Yeah," Rigel murmured. The memories were coming back in fragments now, almost like trying to remember a bad dream. He remembered the pain and the strange cold numbness. He remembered rambling on about Gayrile, which had been odd, especially because whenever he had been doing that, his arm hurt worse. And he remembered that horrible cold voice, hissing and spitting in his head. "What exactly happened?" he asked finally. What did that blade do to me?" Dusty hesitated. Dendayo didn't want to tell you. You probably don't need to worry about it now, though. You're fine now. What could have happened isn't important." "What could have happened?" Rigel prompted. Dusty hesitated again for a long moment. "The hazes, their blades are enchanted or something, and if you get stabbed, then you turn into one of them." Rigel stared at her in shock. Dusty looked down, uncomfortable. Rigel could hardly find the words. "But how? I might have—" He remembered that sudden numbness, the dark thoughts that had crossed his mind right after the blow, and the voice in his head. Was that what the hazes felt like? Cold, numb, knowing nothing but the bidding of their master as he hissed his instructions in their heads, controlling them. Dusty seemed to guess what he was thinking. "Don't worry. You're all right now. You're here." Rigel nodded, dismissing what could have happened for the present. He put on his shirt and glanced around. They were in another glade, this one a little bigger than the last one, surrounded by towering birch trees. He glanced at where the horses were tied, and was startled to see two more. "Whose are those?" he asked, nodding to the horses. Dusty nodded to the other side of the glade, where Dendayo and Glentry sat and talked. A third figure sat with them, speaking earnestly with Dendayo. "He got here about an hour ago. He's one of Dendayo's lieutenants in the army." Rigel moved toward them, stretching out his shoulder gently. While it was very stiff and felt bruised, that searing pain was gone. The newcomer wore a simple gray outfit under a leather jerkin, light shoes, and a mottled green cloak. A quiver of arrows was strapped to his back, and he held a longbow across his knees. His hair was strawberry blonde, pulled back at the nape of his neck. The chiseled features, pointed ears, and keen eyes marked him as an elf. He was talking to Dendio as Rigel and Dusty approached. At any rate, we have tried that method, of water, but I don't think that's the key. There must be some other way to stop them. And once we stop them, I am sure we could help them. I'd bet you're right at that, but the issue is how to do that, Dendio murmured. He glanced up as Rigel and Dusty reached them, and smiled warmly. Glad to see you're on your feet. How does your arm feel? Stiff, Rigel admitted, and glanced at the elf. His eyes had a quick calculating look in them that told Rigel he would be a dangerous opponent, but they were friendly as he smiled. Dendio tells me you faced the hazes, he said to Rigel. That was quite brave. Rigel felt himself redden slightly at the praise. Well, all I did was get stabbed, honestly. I didn't really do much. The elf smiled. Honesty is a good trait for a warrior to have, so I applaud you. Dendio smiled as well, then turned to Rigel. Rigel, this is Lyrion, son of Lio, one of my oldest comrades and friends. He will be with us for a little while, I hope. At least until I continue my journey west, Lyrion said. Rigel sat down near Dendio, remembering his question. Dendio, those hazes, do you think they'll follow us? They might, Dendio said grimly. At any rate, we can do very little about them until we are back in Sia, at which point we can hopefully develop some sort of strategy against them. They cannot be completely without weakness, Lyrion mused. There must be some way to stop them, some flaw in Cato's spell. And once we figure that out... No more hazes, Dendio finished for him. How will we figure that out? Dusty asked, cocking her head slightly to the side. The only way we figure anything out. We watch. We observe. We gather facts, use trial and error, until we've got it, Dendio told her. That sounded like something Norrin would say, Rigel thought, and found his interest increase. Then, you think they could be changed back to their original forms? Lyrion spoke. We believe they might, and that is the purpose of my quest.